The Michigan Man Podcast, episode 200. Brady Hoke thinks Michigan is close to championship level and acknowledges the pressure to win. And Michigan basketball looks to the future. Is it a rebuilding or a reloading year? That and more on this week's show. This is the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and Happy Easter. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. On today's show, football beat writer Nick Baumgardner from Mlive will join us on the Michigan Game Day segment. We'll find out what Nick gleaned from spring practice and get his take on where Team 135 is heading into summer workouts. Nick and I also discuss the Michigan Student Government's report on how the university is handling sexual misconduct issues, and we even had Nick put on his old basketball beat writer's hat and give us his thoughts on Michigan hoops moving forward. Before we get to that, let's start with a few Wolverine news and notes for this week. Earlier this week, Brady Hoke told Michigan beat writers he thinks his team is close to competing for a Big Ten title. Despite what we saw in the spring game, Brady believes there is much improvement with this team at every position group. He does acknowledge the pressure to win, and he said that pressure comes with the job. He expects that. Still, he is very optimistic about this group and is happy with the emerging leadership on the team. Shortly after we publish the show today, we'll learn about the future of two Wolverines. Tuesday afternoon, Nick Stauskas and Glenn Robinson III will be holding a press conference. Most experts believe both players will declare for the draft. Mitch McGary is still mulling over his decision and has not set a date to announce his future plan. We'll keep you posted on that. So it looks like a rebuilding year for Michigan hoops. There are 4 new freshmen on the way, and there's still plenty of talent around. Karis LeVert, Derek Walton Jr., and Zach Irvin will all be back next season. If Mitch McGary decides to stay, things will look even brighter. I just have a hunch that John Beilein will do what he always does and put together another solid winter of Michigan basketball for us. Of course, there's going to be a new cast. But Coach B seems to thrive in putting the pieces together each season, so I think I'm already looking forward to that. Coming up next on our Michigan Game Day segment, I'll be joined by football beat writer Nick Baumgardner from Mlive, so stick around for that. Here on the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. Joining us on Michigan Game Day this week, football beat writer Nick Baumgardner from Mlive. Great to have you back, Nick.
Good to be here, Mike.
Well, of course, a week ago, spring practice wrapped up, and we're spending a couple of weeks, looking back at that, getting the take of the beat writers as to where they think this team is. And Nick, one thing we know for sure is all of the beat writers have limited access during spring practice. Why don't you explain to our listeners and your readers what exactly is limited access for Michigan football?
Oh, man, where do we start? Actually, as far as practice goes, outside of the spring game itself, which was that wasn't much of a game. It was more of a practice with 45 minutes of scrimmage. Outside of that, we don't get to see any practice. Michigan doesn't allow us into any, weekly practices. That goes throughout the season as well. So we don't see practice. We don't see any of that stuff as far as access goes. We did talk, however, to a ton of players this spring, more than we maybe have at any time of Brady Hoke's tenure during the offseason. So we talked to a lot of guys this year, so that was definitely helpful to kind of get their sense on where the team's at and everything else. We were able to get a lot of insights from that. But as far as the on-field stuff goes, we kind of have to take their word for it and then see what we can see and kind of glean what we can glean from that spring game itself, because we don't get to see any practices.
Well, given the fact that you did get some access to the players, as you just mentioned, did you come away with any kind of a feeling after talking to them, maybe where this team is right now heading into summer drills?
Yeah, I think there was a couple different things. I think number one, I think they were all especially offensive. I think they all sort of admitted that early in spring camp it was a bit of a struggle to kind of adjust to a new system, which is expected. You kind of expect that. It's a new deal, new things for everyone. I think they made some big strides by the end of camp. Guys seemed less. I don't want to say if they were ever overwhelmed, but they seemed more comfortable with the whole thing. So that was one. I think the offensive line. I think even if you ask them, admittedly, they would tell you they still have a ways to go. Which, I don't know if that's expected or not. It's definitely not good. I think, Brady Oak even said at the end of camp, he was pretty honest about his line all camp that he still doesn't know who the top 5 guys are. Obviously still waiting for Eric Magnuson to get healthy. And they're still looking at possible adding a transfer from Alabama. So, they don't really know yet who the 5 guys will be and where they'll be at. They played a lot of different guys at a lot of different positions. A lot of guys on the offensive line this spring played at least 2 spots. So that's, they're trying to figure out any way they can to get the best 5 guys on the field and make sure that position is stable, because that thing holds the key to pretty much everything. And then the last, I guess, real impression that I got, and this is from talking to the guys, that this team does to me, at least early anyway, they do seem to be closer as a unit. They seem to have better chemistry this year. Not saying last year's was terrible, but at times it wasn't great. I think that came through, and I think that was pretty obvious, and some of the guys even admitted it at the end of the year. I think that they've sort of changed the way they go about leading from the top. I think the seniors have been more, they've embraced the younger guys a little bit more and let them have a voice. So I think the team is closer from top to bottom. I think they're a little tighter. And I think if they stay that way, I think they'll we've talked about finding the way to, figure out 4 or 5 missed points that you had. Those types of things, if you stay together as a team and kind of continue to fight for each other, you can make up some of those. So I think early on, anyway, they're doing a good job of that moving into the summer.
Yeah, sticking with that for just a minute, Nick. I know last year, late in the season, when Frank Clark made his statement that there was a point in the season, I'm just paraphrasing him now, that the team stopped playing for each other. And, of course, that goes back to leadership. We thought we had a really fine leadership class last year, but we don't have many seniors this year. So where do you think that leadership, at least, what are the players saying? Where is that coming from?
Well, they still have Jake Ryan, who was a captain on last year's team. Devin Gardner is obviously a leader, even though he wasn't a captain last year. Frank himself is looked at as a leader now. Frank's grown up an awful lot in his time at Michigan. But more than that, all of those guys, all 3 of those guys to a man, have said that they also want guys in the junior class and sophomore class, and even some of the younger freshmen that are playing. They want them to be leaders as well, and they want them to have voice on the team. They don't want anybody to be afraid to speak up if they feel like they need to say something. They don't want anybody to be afraid to voice a concern for fear of being, told that whatever their concern was doesn't matter. I think that basically the focal or the takeaway I got was last year you had some very strong voices on the team, but there was only a few of them, and it was only a few guys that were basically ever comfortable enough to kind of speak up and say say what they wanted to say. Anyone else who maybe wanted to do it either felt like they couldn't or wasn't their place. I think these guys want to make sure that everybody feels like it's everyone's place to say whatever they feel, because they're all in this together. They all went 7-6 last year, and they all want to win. So I think this is more going to be. I think they want it to be more of a team-based leadership group instead of maybe 2 or 3 guys, if that makes sense.
Well, good. We're going to need that moving forward this year. When you look back at the spring practice, though, Nick, I think if you could pick a position group that the fans wanted to see progress from and kept their eyes on, it was that offensive line group. And, I keep thinking, I want to see that too, but are we expecting too much in the way of improvement, given the fact that the team only had 15 practices and we expect them to morph into a cohesive unit over that time period?
Oh yeah. I think people were probably expecting way too much from that group, considering they are still, I know people don't like to hear it, but they are still very young. They still got a lot of guys in there who, played for the first time last year, sophomores and redshirt freshmen, and even a true freshman in Mason Cole. So, they were bad at the end of last year. They had a long way to go at the end of last year, and to think that they would have completely turned a corner by, practice 15 of spring is probably unfair. There were things they did that looked a little bit better. There were things they did that looked about the same. They've got a long way to go. A lot of that is confidence. A lot of that is cohesion and just playing together. And communication, I think, is the biggest thing. This offensive line, really for the last 2 years, not just last year, but the year before, people forget, wasn't very good in 2012 either. And they just never ever felt like they were on the same page. And to me, that I always go back to this. It starts in the middle with your center. Your center has to be able to make sure everyone's on the same page. They have to communicate and make sure everyone knows what they're doing. And I think Doug Nussmeier said it best at one point. I've never heard anyone say this before, but he said, if we're going to make a mistake, let's all make the same mistake so that, we're at least getting maybe 3 yards on a play instead of losing 5, which makes perfect sense to me, because if you're all on the same page and you're all doing the same thing and somebody gets it wrong, that probably means you're all doing it wrong, but at least you're all going to the same spot and somebody's not getting dropped for a 15-yard loss. So I think hammering home the fact to those guys, the younger guys, that if you lose 4 or 5 yards on second down, you're punting almost every time. That drive is dead almost every time. And I think that those sacks and those negative plays that just happened all over the place last year. I think the importance and emphasis on that just cannot happen again. We don't have to be a dominating rushing team that racks up 500 yards a game, but we cannot allow all these negative plays. I think that's the biggest focus right now, getting them on the same page and making them understand that the negative stuff, the negative plays, are just game killers. They will lose you football games every single time. They're as bad as turnovers in some instances, and I think that's where they're at.
Well, we heard from the players that Coach Nussmeier has simplified the offense in some ways, and that he brings a ton of energy to practice and in the meeting rooms. What is your early impression of Coach Nussmeier?
Yeah, very hands-on guy, as we all expected. The people that I spoke with before he got here had said that he's a very player-friendly coach in that he's a former quarterback himself. So for the quarterbacks are concerned, I think he'd be a great help for them, because he can get down there with them. He's been through what they've gone through before. He can be sort of in their drills and sort of show them, exactly what he means when he says he wants something done. I think the fact that he's a coach who's never been fired anywhere or let go. His offense hasn't failed at a place where they've shoved him out the door. I think he's one of these coaches that continues to move up in jobs. I think that he's found success in different environments. I'm not sure if he's taken on a rebuilding job as far as an offensive line or something like that goes to this degree. He probably has, probably not under this much pressure, but he's succeeded pretty much everywhere he's been in making whatever units as good or better than he found it when he left. So, I think that attention to detail. I think he understands, how to move the football. I think he understands quarterback situation from pro style stuff. I just think that it's a basic deal. It's basic football, more or less. It's not, I'm sitting in a room with a notebook creating all these special plays that are going to be so unique and no one's going to know what hit them. We're just going to do what the defense gives us. We're going to take what's there and we're going to move the football and score points, because that's basic football. And I think that's been his philosophy since he got here. That's been what he's talked about. I think this team needs that. They needed to be simplified. They needed to just start moving the football again and stop worrying about all these special packages and everything else that happened in the last, with Borges. I mean, sometimes it got so out of control that you didn't know what was happening. So I think they need to be kind of harnessed in, especially a young group, and kind of refocused. And I think this is what he's done this spring, and it's been good for him.
Well, early this year, Brady said there was a quarterback competition. He said that again last week after spring practice ended, which I think is very good for Devin to keep hearing him say that. All that said, it is still hard to see Devin, even though he did not have a great spring practice game, still hard to see him losing that starting job, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is, and he's ahead of the other two at this point. Other three really, in Spate, Morris, and then Bellamy. But I mean, he's ahead of them based on experience, based on he's been in the fire before, he's done all that stuff, and he's adjusted to new offenses. I mean, this is his third different offense in 5 years, so he's done this before as far as the transition goes. He's ahead of the curve, no doubt about it. But like you said, Mike, it's important, I think, as well, for him to continue to hear from Hoke that this thing isn't over, and you need to continue to push yourself, because Brady even said he did not have a good performance in the spring game, and that's not acceptable. You need to be better than that. So, I remember I asked what would he have to do to kind of put this to bed to have you stop saying this is a competition, and he said he just needs to be more consistent. Day in and day out, he needs to end it by being consistent and leaving no doubt, basically, and stop leaving the door open for some of those guys, because I think that's where they're at. They're saying, Devin obviously is the guy going into the fall that it's certainly his job to lose. But, if Shane Morris, or probably Shane Morris would be the only one in realistic terms, if Shane Morris has a terrific summer and comes back to change quarterback and is ready to go, and all of a sudden he's pushing, Devin could lose the job. I think that's the statement they want to hammer home to him, that, it's probably your job, but you certainly could lose it. And, I'm sure you don't want that to happen, so continue to work hard and continue to be focused. And I think Devin's doing those things. You said all the right things. He seems to enjoy the competition.